Evolutionists say the oddest things when they think creationists aren't listening.
Surprising admissions from leading scientists this week on Creation Magazine Live.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say that this is gonna be a bunch of quote mining. Hell, let's turn it into a drinking game. Go ahead and grab a shot glass and get ready. Every single time these two doopuses misappropriate a quote or strawman the people they're trying to talk about, take a drink. And if you survive the episode, let me know in the comments section. Alright, I'm changing up the fan art thing a little again. I know that I keep doing that on you guys and I'm sorry, but I haven't found one that quite fits. So we're going to try going through the fan art really quickly after the intro to see if that works. So we've got the first one from Comrade Grayson, which makes me look like I'm part of a cult. This next one by Gaelic Knox, which again is one of the ever-present reasons why I can never truly escape Rule 63. And a comic by Spooky Boy Ray. Hope you guys enjoyed the fan art, and let's go ahead and get right into the video.
Welcome to Creation Magazine Live. My name's Richard Fangrad.
And I'm Calvin Smith.
Now this week on Creation Magazine Live, our topic is Evolutionists Say the Oddest Things.
Well, and that's bound to be a very interesting topic, especially for two reasons. One, I still have yet to understand why the term evolutionist even came into popularity amongst young Earth creationists. It seems to be a deliberate method of othering any scientist or layman who actually understands the theory of evolution, even in a broad sense. But I've never dealt with any organization that deals explicitly in us versus them narratives before.
Now that's the title of one of our newest books here. And so today we're going to basically share some interesting quotes from evolutionists who are daring enough to admit problems with various aspects of evolution from our little book here.
I'm going to go ahead and poke another hole in the narrative here. They say that these people are daring to admit problems with currently understood evolutionary theory, but I can only assume that this comes from the rabid misconception that science is somehow this monolith of dogma. I'm sure everybody in my audience has heard it at least one too many times. You want to know how you make a lot of money as a scientist? It's not by following the status quo, it's by proving the status quo wrong. Either that, or adding to our current pool of knowledge. Basically, you've got to do something different to get famous as a scientist. You can't just sit there writing books saying the same thing over and over again and how you're going to defend your belief in the millions of ways and why it's right. That would be apologetics. But you guys haven't actually made any real points yet, so maybe I've gone ahead and thrown that burn out a little too early.
That's right. Now, in the foreword of the book, the editor, Lita Kosner, makes some opening remarks, and we'll start by summarizing these. She mentioned that this is the third quote book, basically, that we've produced, CMI's produced over the years, and some critics have tried to undermine the effectiveness of these quotes by accusing us of quote mining out of context.
Right.
But this is a misunderstanding about what quoting out of context really means.
So you mean you're going to redefine what it means to suit your narrative. I'm not 100% certain this is exactly what you're going to do, but I'm sure as we watch the video this will become at least a little more clear. It should be noted that quote mines are informal fallacies, and they are a type of false attribution in which any passage is removed from its surrounding material in a way to distort its intended meaning. A good example of this is the classic diatribe we've heard 1,000 times where Charles Darwin says that the human eye is so complex that the notion that it has arrived by chance seems to be absurd in the highest degree. However, he later goes on to clarify, in the same chapter mind you, that which seems absurd can be shown to be sensible if observation and reason dictate that to be the case. He even specifically says that these issues that seem that they couldn't have been formed by natural selection, though insuperable by our imagination, should not be considered as subversive to the theory. Because again, that which seems absurd at first glance, if observation and reason dictate is the case, will still be the case, no matter how absurd you think it may be. This is a quote I've heard 1,000 times, whether it be from Nephilim Free, Steven Anderson, Matt Powell, or any number of other dishonest creationist quote miners. The issue is almost always largely the same. If you take simply the portions where he says that an eye coming by natural selection is absurd, yes, this quote seems like it would be damning to the theory of evolution, except when you read on in Darwin's book, you see that he actually has a few clarifying points, which makes this entire idea that this phrase is damning, well, laughable. Anywho, that tiny bit of history out of the way, let's go ahead and get back to their video now that I've sufficiently derailed this.
And the first one that we're going to start with, the area is philosophy quotes. So let's start there. And we title all the quotes just so people can get an understanding of what they're about to read. This is from Michael Ruse, and the title is Evolution a Religion?
Okay.
A very revealing quote from a Darwinist.
A very revealing quote from a Darwinist. Before you bring it up on screen, I'm going to go ahead and say that, again, calling somebody a Darwinist or an evolutionist or anything like that seems like a method of othering them. It's just a dishonest method of creating an us versus them narrative so that you can get your jollies off whenever you start to feel, quote, persecuted. But go ahead and bring up the quote. Let's see if you misrepresent it.
I don't think believing that Charles Darwin's theory of evolution through natural selection, his version, or today's version, commits you to religious belief. I think that as I myself would, you extend the scope of the theory to an understanding of knowledge acquisition and justification, and the same for morality, evolutionary epistemology, and evolutionary ethics, then it can act as a religion substitute or alternative. It gives you a world picture that some people, starting with me, find entirely satisfying. So what he's really admitting is that as soon as you accept that and you start thinking about anything else outside of just how things came to be, supposedly, of course it becomes a religion.
Yeah, he's saying at a very basic level, evolution is a religion.
No, the fuck he's not. Evolutionary epistemology refers to three very distinct topics: the biological evolution of cognitive mechanisms in animals and humans, the theory that knowledge itself evolves by natural selection, or the study of historical discovery of new abstract entities such as an abstract number or an abstract value. Basically, it's taking the theory of evolution as a framework to pursue knowledge. Last I checked, that's not what religion does. Considering that religion is the belief in a worship of a superhuman controlling power, especially a god, or a particular system of faith and worship. The only way that you can comport evolutionary theory to be something akin to a religion is by using the loosest definition of religion called a pursuit or interest to which someone ascribes supreme importance. But that version of religion could literally mean that anime waifus are a religion, Yu-Gi-Oh cards are a religion, hell, folding socks could be a religion at that point. You've basically muddied down the meaning of that word so much that it could mean practically everything, which is actually incredibly dishonest because, as I was taught in my young earth creationist private school, if everything can be considered a type of religion or worship, we've now found ourselves in a scenario where your religion can literally war against everything and say that it's evil. So for instance, my grandma being told that the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were of the devil and therefore were a religious anti-entity to the Christian faith. I was told much the same thing about things like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon. This definition of religion is not useful. It's imprecise, it's sloppy, and it's the only possible way you can take that quote and make it mean what you think. Also, you can replace a religion with a hobby. You can replace the community aspects of religion with any other community. That does not automatically make the thing you replace your religion with a religion. So when this person is talking about his philosophical stance on something like evolution and saying that someone could use it as a framework outside of religion, that does not mean he's calling evolution a religion, and to say so is incredibly dishonest, especially when in the quote he specifically says that he does not consider evolution a religion. Also, if I were to go back to the precise definitions of religion, there is no superhuman controlling power in evolution, and there is no faith or worship of evolution. So even with your misappropriated quote, we don't actually get to the conclusion that you're trying to get us to unless we're being incredibly dishonest.
It's often the stereotype, right, is that creation is religion and evolution is science, and it's all about science, and they're doing science, and it's all about scientists and that kind of thing. Yeah. Whereas here's an evolutionist clearly saying that, well, no, it is a religious idea. It's a worldview. Right. It provides a basis for morality and things, and he's not ashamed to admit that.
Let's not get into the type of morality that your particular religion happens to espouse. I really don't want to bring up the slaughter of the Canaanites or the Midianites, or how the Bible doesn't do anything to condemn slavery, or how the Golden Rule is literally one of the most bullshit moral principles anybody could try to use, considering that the Golden Rule literally assumes that you want good things to happen to yourself. This is not always the case. So under the Golden Rule, if you wanted bad things to happen to yourself and you treated others that way, you would still be working in tandem with the Golden Rule. rule by being a horrible human being. It's such an easily undermined rule, and I don't understand why people think that is a good basis of morality. Also, when somebody says that they could appeal to evolution for morality, what they're actually saying is that as human beings developed consciousness, and as we started working in more and more complex societies, based on evolutionary principles, it would be incredibly natural for any type of moral system of any kind, as long as it's functional, to develop. Like, seriously, any type of moral system that allows the society to be cohesive will work. That's what a type of evolutionary morality would hold to. And if we look out in the world and see the varying different types of relativistic moralities that different cultures espouse, it would seem to be that that's the case. Note that I said relativistic, not subjective. There is a big difference. That might be a video for later.
Yep. Let's do another one from the philosophy section here. This is from Gordy Slack, and we've titled it "Evolution Belief Often Derived from Atheistic Dogma, Not Science." Which leads me to my final concession to my ID foes. When they say that some proponents of evolution are blind followers, they're right. A few years ago, I covered a conference of the American atheists in Las Vegas. I met dozens of people there who were dead sure that evolution theory was correct, though they didn't know a thing about adaptive radiation, genetic drift, or even plain old natural selection. They came to their Darwinism via a commitment to naturalism and atheism, not through science, through the study of science. They're still correct when they say that evolution happens, but I'm afraid they're wrong to call themselves skeptics, unencumbered by ideology. Many of them are best described as zealots. Ideological zeal isn't incompatible with good science. Its coincidence with a theory proves nothing about that theory's explanatory power.
Right.
Now, there's an interesting quote as well.
Yes, it is, and it's actually one that I wholeheartedly agree with. Here's the thing, before you misrepresent this quote 5 ways from Sunday, allow me to take a crack at it. Because of people who are proponents of intelligent design, we have this fabricated war between evolution and religion. Because of this fake war between these two principles that are not actually opposites, we find ourselves in this very strange world where religion and science are at war with one another, only because a bunch of people in the mid-20th century decided that they wanted to start a movement with pseudoscientific nonsense warring against actual hard-coded science. For anyone who wants a bit of reading after this episode, please look into Henry Morris. He was born in 1918, and he devised and promoted the idea called creation science. It's the underlying principle that the entire young Earth creationism movement, and therefore most of the anti-evolution movement, relies on. Because of that individual and his dumb movement, we now have this awkward war between religion and science. Note, this is not the only time that religion has stood in the way of science. Obviously, there are historical issues when you talk about people like Galileo, but also our modern notions of academia, and yes, science in general, did stem from religious roots. So, since this quote is talking about atheist dogma, please do not fall into the atheist dogmatic label of saying that religion is the de facto enemy of science. It has been both enemy and friend throughout history.
Absolutely. So we're going to continue through the quote book when we get back in just a moment.
Wait, you didn't think there was anything that needed to be said there? You didn't want to harp on atheist dogma? You thought that the quote itself was enough to support your position? My gosh. But I would figure that this would be considered one of those juicy quotes that you would do everything in your power to sink your teeth into. But apparently you thought just the quote itself was enough to support you. So, I guess whatever.
At a forum on depression, a young man said, "I think some people may have an inability to cope, and maybe this might sound a bit extreme, but that might be Darwinian theory. The Darwin theory of survival of the fittest. Maybe some of us aren't meant to survive. Maybe some of us are meant to kill ourselves." Now, why did this young man think that human life has such little value? Perhaps he'd heard people like Oxford professor Peter Atkins, who said, "We are just a bit of slime on the planet." Likewise, psychologist Susan Blackmore said, "If you really think about evolution and why we human beings are here, you have to come to the conclusion that we're here for absolutely no reason at all." What a stark contrast to the words of Jesus.
Oh my god, I get that this is your commercial break, but this Right here, this explains the whole freaking problem. By taking the misnomer of survival of the fittest, which, by the way, doesn't mean that some of us are just meant to die, it just means that those who have adapted to their environment better are more likely to procreate. That's it. That's literally all it means. It's talking about survival on a species level, not on an individual level. Which, before some young Earth creationist moron decides to tell me in my comment section that, oh, does that mean that if you can't procreate you're useless to society? Absolutely not. If you can't procreate, but you happen to be able to support a family through adoption, or you happen to make some scientific discovery, or you happen to be literally one of any thousands of ground-level workers in society, or a CEO of a company, or, again, literally anything, there's thousands of examples I could pull from, then you are contributing to society on the whole, and the entire idea of survival of the fittest is about the society. It's about the entire species. It is not about a single individual. But here's the thing. Evolution doesn't say that life is ultimately meaningless. That would be philosophical naturalism. Philosophical naturalism would hold that there is no ultimate meaning to anything, and that's just fine. You don't need ultimate meaning in every aspect of your life for that life to be meaningful. Otherwise, I wouldn't put on my socks before my shoes because there is no ultimate meaning to putting on socks. It may sound stupid, but my socks make my feet feel good when they're in my shoes and prevent them from getting way too sweaty. It may not be ultimate meaning, but this little bit of meaning is just enough for what I need it to be. The idea that we need ultimate meaning, or we need ultimate purpose, or we even need ultimate morality is absolute horseshit. Mainly because there's not a single person that can substantiate that claim without appealing to whatever religious holy book they happen to ascribe to. Anyway, that's just a tangent. This commercial's dumb. Let's go on to the rest of their episode. The why I'm looking to the rest of this episode for some type of return to sanity, I'm not sure.
All right, if you just tuned in this week, we're looking at interesting quotes from evolutionists where they're questioning or commenting on various aspects of evolution. These are quotes from one of our newer books, Evolutionists Say the Oddest Things, Surprising Admissions from Leading Scientists. There we go.
Well, let's continue with another one in the philosophy quotes section. And here's a great one from L. Harrison Matthews. We titled it, Evolution is an Unproved Theory. He said, the fact of evolution is the backbone of biology, and biology is thus in the peculiar position of being founded on an unproved theory. Is it then a science or a faith? Belief in the theory of evolution is thus exactly parallel to belief in special creation. Both are concepts which believers know to be true, but neither up to the present has been capable of proof. What a stunning admission from a Darwinist, where he's just saying, look, you can't prove creation and you can't prove evolution.
So you mentioned before how a quote mine was taking that quote without its entire context. Well, considering that that is actually part of a paragraph, I would say that you definitely misappropriated that quote, especially considering your quote begins on page 10 of the book you're talking about, Is Evolution a Fact or Theory? On page 12 of the book that quote comes from, Matthews makes the distinction that during the last 50 years, genetics has unraveled many of the extremely complex phenomena of inheritance, and has showed that evolution, by natural selection of random mutations, generally of small size, is a logical explanation for the origin of the immense array of organisms now and past living on Earth. He goes on to point out that there are some other scientists who happen to think about the theory of evolution the same way they would a faith, and finds contention with that, and I would as well. Simply saying that you believe that theory is true without having any reason to do so is a little strange to me, and not exactly the most honest way to go about things, but there you have it. Seeing as your original quote lives and dies on being in isolation, and when you look at the entirety of the book that it's in, you find that those are not actually the conclusions of the person who you're quoting, I would say that yes, this is a quote mine, and it is very dishonest.
And the reason why you can't prove them is because they're not methods, concepts that you can prove using the scientific method.
I'm going to shove the hilt end of my hammer into my eyes and gouge them both out. You do not prove things with the scientific method. Proving is for math. So when a scientist says that you can't prove something with the scientific method, that's not an admission that they can't say that something is the case. That's an admission that that is a category error. Just as I can't prove to you that gravity is real, but if I no less hop off a cliff, gravity will take me down to the end and lead me to an untimely end, I still, at that point, would not have provided a proof for gravity. proofs are for mathematical concepts. Also, the idea that you need to have things in the same category, like saying that evolution is a belief system, or saying that it falls outside the scientific method much like theology, it all reeks of dishonesty, since the only reason that you can't prove a god scientifically is because a god is considered a supernatural concept. Science deals with what's natural. Like, seriously, you are being an active hindrance to the human species by pushing this narrative that well-established theories in science are directly opposed to your personal religious belief. Your religion was not founded on any scientific principles and therefore is not undermined by them. The only way that a religion can be undermined by science is if it happens to have tenets that directly correspond to science. As far as I know, the only thing that cannot be taken for allegory in the Bible that you have to espouse that's unscientific is the resurrection of a dead man. Everything else can pretty much be swept under the rug of allegory and metaphor pretty handedly, and I'd prefer that it was, because I would rather live in a world where we had scientifically literate Christians than the one we currently live in, where there are Christians who hold on to scientific illiteracy because they are Christian, when a staggering amount of scientists happen to be Christian and prove that you don't necessarily have to have this stupid dogma. But that's been 3 quote mines so far. I can't wait to see what you have next.
It's about history, it's not about science.
And these are things that we say on this show and the articles on creation.com. Our whole ministry is...
And we're often criticized for it, but
Well,
here's a
criticized,
Darwinist and a scientist admitting it.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, let's do another one here. We've got Richard Dawkins, one of our famous our favorite atheists here, and the way we title it is Dawkins. He says theistic evolution is a cop-out. This is from the section Evolution Opposes Christianity. Dawkins says this: I think that it's a tremendous cop-out. If God wanted to create life, to create humans, it would be slightly odd that he should choose the extraordinarily roundabout way of waiting for 10 billion years before life got started, and then waiting for another 4 billion years until you got human beings capable of worshiping and sinning and all the other things that religious people are interested in.
Right. Now that's a quote from when he's debating a theistic evolutionist, Francis Collins. Collins, a Christian, calls himself a Christian, believes in the theory of evolution, and Dawkins is just having none of it.
Yeah.
That's not helping people to come to Christ by believing in evolution.
Atheists recognize that trying to marry evolution with some type of a notion of a creator God just doesn't work.
Yes, you can. The only reason that you don't have to worry about this is because evolution doesn't deal with origin. If you want to talk about the origin of life, you have various different creation myths, and then you've got something like abiogenesis in the naturalistic sense. Evolution is categorically separate from these. Evolution deals with the diversification of these species over time, not the origin of all life, period. Also, I guarantee you that there are a lot of creationists who love Richard Dawkins, because I'm going to be perfectly honest, I've found that Richard Dawkins is only ever terribly convincing to people who are already atheists or who were leaning on the fence to begin with. I've read The God Delusion. It's a wonderfully poetic book for somebody who's already an atheist, but if you're not an atheist, it's thoroughly unconvincing. Dawkins is amazing when he's in his wheelhouse of biology, but as soon as you get him into religious debate, he flounders. I love the guy. I think that he's been a wonderful help to atheist movements across the world. However, it seems to me that the only emotion that Richard Dawkins can have in most debates is one of British incredulity. And while there are fans of Dawkins who truly enjoy that, I really can't get behind it. Let's go ahead and say that, for instance, it turned out that a creator deity was true and evolution also was true. We would be left with what Darwin originally quoted when he talked about the human eye, in that the mere fact that the idea seems absurd doesn't mean anything if all observation shows that it is in fact the case. It may seem absurd that a creator deity would resort to a mechanism like evolution to carry out speciation, but as an atheist, if that turned out to be the case, the only thing that would change is that I was an atheist. By saying that evolution and religion cannot function together the way that you're trying literally means that you're accusing someone like Francis Collins of compartmentalization. And let's ignore the fact that before Darwin even started working on his theory of evolution, he was practicing to go to seminary. Your dogma, in your desperate attempt to avoid truth, relies on a black and white narrative so that you can have this us versus them principle. But here's the thing. Reality doesn't need that. If you want to say that your Bible is the absolute arbiter of truth, you would be wrong. Just as if you want to say that a creator deity is incompatible with the theory of evolution, you are also wrong. That's an unfounded assertion, and you literally cannot back that up. So trying to take this Dawkins quote and comport it to your narrative is, as with every other quote that you've used, incredibly dishonest.
Absolutely.
And atheists recognize that. So ironic that in a lot of churches today, there's Christians who don't whose thinking on this issue isn't as clear as Dawkins, who's
Exactly.
an atheist. Amazing.
That's why that quote comes from the area in the book entitled "Evolution Opposes Christianity."
Yeah.
So I'll give you
Yep.
another quote from that section.
I don't know how many times I have to say that it doesn't, unless you literally take the entirety of Genesis as 100% factual. It's not an issue. You can keep your belief, as silly as I find it. You can keep all of your fairy tales. But this artificial dogmatic narrative of us versus them is tiring, and it hurts my brain.
Theistic evolution removes the need for Christ as Savior.
Yikes.
This is from Peter Bowler. He's a Darwin expert and anti-Christian, anti-creationist. He says, if Christians accept that humanity was the product of evolution, even assuming the process could be seen as an expression of the Creator's will, then the whole idea of original sin would have to be reinterpreted. Far from falling from an original state of grace in the Garden of Eden, we've risen gradually from our animal origins, and if there was no sin from which we needed salvation, what was the purpose of Christ's agony on the cross? Christ became merely the perfect man who showed us what we could all hope to become when evolution finished its upward course. How much more of an eloquent statement about how damaging this concept of believing that God used evolution could
and
you
how
get?
important Genesis is to the rest of Christian theology.
Oh my god, it hurts. It actively hurts to listen to you two. Okay, so the entire concept of original sin is a stupid concept, not just because you have the issues that you brought up before, but because it literally assumes that I am responsible for my ancestors' misdeeds. This is why there are a lot of scientists who happen to be Christian that interpret Genesis as allegorical. They view the entire Garden of Eden incident as a metaphor, one that speaks to the flaws of the human condition, and that Christ's literal dying on the cross was an effort to free ourselves from some of the flaws we find in our human condition. Note, though, a lot of this argumentation, a lot of this back and forth wouldn't even happen if we didn't have the young earth creationist movement to begin with. You wouldn't have quotes like this coming from a lot of prolific atheists if you didn't have tactics like the ones you're using right now, which literally make you the enemy of science and reason, being used for decades. Like, it's not horribly ironic that a, quote, Darwinist is saying these things. What's horribly ironic is how hard you're throwing those stones from your glass house when it's literally shows like this that are the reason why you have atheists who think that there's a war between evolution and Christianity. You, and people like you, created this artificial conflict. Like, here's the thing. I'm gonna propose a scenario that I find very likely. In a world where religion was religion and science was science, and they never crossed paths, they would operate as they always do. Religion would delve into apologetics to defend itself, and science would constantly refine itself. These two would do as they always have. But, and correct me in the comment section if I'm wrong, but it seems to be the case that 9 times out of 10, it's usually the creationist who goes after the scientist, and then the scientist who ends up having to retort. It is usually not the scientist who's having to go and attack the creationist first. It is almost always the creationist attacking first. So I'm curious as to what would happen if we happen to live in a world where religion and science never actually fought each other. People were willing to take their religion as a sign of their culture, and they were able to move on with it and not do anything to impede scientific progress. And that science, in the world where it's not actually actually attacked wouldn't have a reason to constantly be bloodying its knuckles in an effort to defend itself. Common examples of this, at least in the United States, are the myriad of attempts to bring in creationism into the public schools. If you guys would like a historical example, the Kitzmiller versus Dover trial on intelligent design in the United States. That trial found that creationism had just been relabeled intelligent design and was therefore unconstitutional to teach in American public schools because it is a violation of separation of church and state. If I lived in a world where the church and state were so easily separated, then we probably wouldn't have any of these discussions. So what you've shown first is two quote mines that are incredible misrepresentations of the original intent of the authors, and two quote mines that are a direct result of practices which you are currently espousing. I would go into more, but it looks like I'm going to have to save anything else in this video for a part 2, considering there's at least 10 more minutes in your video, and unpacking all of your bullshit has led me to about a 30-minute video on my part. And for anyone in my audience that thinks that I'm trying to swing for the Christian side too much, that's not actually my intent here. My intent is, instead of the standard approach where an atheist says that, well, there is no God, therefore your religion's bullshit, therefore we don't have to listen to anything you say, I think that in cases like this, it might actually be more productive to approach the topic from the other side. There are people whose faith you simply will not be able to shake, but there are harmful practices that they engage in that you might be able to convince them to simply avoid doing. I don't care if you're a Christian, or an atheist, or a pagan, or a Buddhist, but I do care if you happen to say that something which is objectively true is not. That shows absolutely no reverence for any type of truth, and it is something that I hold issue with. So, now that this more ranty, angry style of response video is out of the way, what did you guys think? Please let me know in the comment section below, and let me know what you thought of the new method of showing fan art. It's literally the old method, just pushed forward a couple of seconds. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Insert end of video tagline here.